Hey there, Heather Holders. Jeff Cutter Gun welcoming you to yet another Cutter Top 10 taping. And today we are going to look at the top 10 NFL players to wear the lucky number 7, Ocho. Lucky number 7. I'm wearing my Patriots jersey. Patriots didn't really have any good players wearing number 7, so obviously they're off the list. But I found 10 of them. And no surprise, they're all quarterbacks because that's usually the quarterback number. I know now you can have wide receivers wearing number 7, which is fooey on my part. So let's get going. Number 10 is Case Keenum. You know him, Minnesota Vikings quarterback, the guy who threw the pass to Stephon Diggs, who stayed in bounds when that New Orleans defender stupidly decided to go up front to meet him instead of playing back and then probably tackle him in play and then force the Vikings to make a long field goal in that NFC to that Minneapolis Miracle of 2017. Well, he was the quarterback, the man from the University of Houston who showed that University of Houston quarterbacks weren't that bad. You know, you think about Andre Ware and David Klingler, but the fact is that yeah, Case Keenum did his job, and then Minnesota freaking got rid of him for the wrong reasons, and you know they've had some problems since. Number 9 is Doug Flutie. Now, of course, you'll be thinking, I would be biased because Doug Flutie did play in the CFL. Well, so did someone else on this list. But the fact is, this is about the NFL. This is not about the CFL. If it was about the CFL, he's the number one player of all time, quarterback of all time. But the fact of the matter is that Doug Flutie did play in the CFL. Well, he was with Boston College, and then no one drafted him. He went to the USFL, and then he went up north to Canada to. Well, he did play in the NFL though for New England and Chicago before being dumped off, and he went up north to Canada to play for the BC Lions for a few years, then to Calgary for 4 years, and then at Argo for a couple of years. But then once Doug Flutie left for Buffalo in this NFL, I was so pissed off I decided to switch allegiances from the Argos to the Alouettes. Well, I've had 3 titles. I know the Argos have had more titles than that, but whatever. Nevertheless, Doug Flutie is a legend, and you know he came back with Buffalo. He led them to a massive win over Jacksonville on home turf, and Flutie Magic was there. Unfortunately, Wade Phillips, or basically the Ralph Wilson, the owner, had a hard on for Rob freaking Johnson, who only had one good game with Jacksonville, and then Buffalo wasted a 5-year, $25 million deal on this guy. So Flutie could have easily helped Buffalo out. If he failed in the playoffs, he failed. So what? But I think with Flutie, I think Buffalo probably beats Tennessee, and there's no Music City Miracle or 1 yard short. But anyway, he went to San Diego. He had his career of New England, of course, the team I support, and he kicked a drop kick field goal. And no, Doug Flutie didn't wear number 7 as a Patriot. He wore number 2. Yeah, he had a drop kick, extra point. So it's just how he ended his career. Number 8 is Randall Cunningham. I know a lot of people will be thinking I'm full of it. But Randall Cunningham could have been better if he wasn't injury prone or just, one dimensional player. Cunningham was a decent passer, but he was more of a runner for the Philadelphia Eagles coming out of UNLV. Well, Doug Flutie became a Boston College. Oh, yeah, I said that. But yeah, Randall Cunningham went from University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and then, he went to the Eagles and he could run for touchdowns. He could pass as well, and including that big 95-yard touchdown pass to Fred Barnett in Buffalo, in which he ducked a couple people in the end zone. And Fern Lindquist called that one, if I remember correctly. But yeah, Randall Cunningham did get injured in 1990. That actually ruined him for a few years. And then he came back as a quarterback for the Vikings and shockingly gave the Vikings a playoff win over the Giants. And then was the quarterback when the Vikings went 15-1 that year in 1998. That should have won to the Super Bowl if it wasn't for Gary Anderson's missed field goal. The worst part about Gary Anderson's missed field goal was it was indoors. He had no excuse. He had no weather excuse. But yeah, Randall Cunningham did quite well. Number 7 is Burt Jones. Well, number 7 is Burt Jones. Burt Jones did play MVP, was an MVP from the University of LSU. He was quarterbacking for the Baltimore Colts in the 1970s. Basically, the Colts were going through a transition. I mean, Johnny Unitas was not who he was. They traded him to the Chargers for the one of Burt Jones. And in 1975, it did work. They got to back-to-back playoff appearances, but then they lost to the Steelers in the 1 year, 2015. And with the fans filing out quickly, it actually worked out because some lunatic decided to buzz Memorial Stadium and crash his plane in the upper deck. No one was injured, not even the pilot. And then, of course, the Ghost to the Post game between the Raiders and the Colts. But yeah, Burt Jones was pretty good and all that. Once he started to fall flat with his performances, Baltimore fell flat, and it was a matter of time before they moved to Indianapolis. Number 6 is Ron Jaws Jaworski, proud member of the Polish American Hall of Fame. Anyway, Jaws came from what university did Jaworski come from? I think he came from Cal. I don't remember. But yeah, Ron Jaworski was pivot for Philadelphia. They needed some help because the Eagles were flat in the 1960s. Of course, the team in 1968 that was supposed to cheer for losing, but then when they won 2 games, it cost them O.J. Simpson. Anyway, the Eagles needed a pivot, and Ron Jaworski picked them up. The Eagles were coming through in the late 70s with Dick Vermeil making sure they picked up where they picked up. They got to Super Bowl 15. He was there, but unfortunately, he threw 3 interceptions to Rod Martin, who helped the Raiders win that game. The Eagle, well, he did throw a 99-yard touchdown pass to Mike Quick in overtime against the Falcons, if I remember correctly. But yeah, Jaworski was pretty good, the best Eagles quarterback until Cunningham kind of came about. Well, Randall Cunningham was number 12 for the Eagles, but he was number 7 for the Vikings, so he counts. All right, number 5 is Boomer Esiason, who was an NFL MVP, went to the Super Bowl with the Cincinnati Bengals, and became a good broadcaster on CBS, being Greg Gumbel's second in command. And I think Jim Nantz, too, right? No, I don't think that was Jim Nantz, but anyway, yeah, Gumbel and Esiason. But yeah, Boomer Esiason was a pretty good player, too. I think he came from the University. Yeah, he came from the University of Maryland. He was the guy who, yeah, that university that came back from 31 to nothing down. Well, his alma mater came back from 31 down against Miami in 1984. He wasn't there. He was drafted by the Bengals. Well, he was with the Bengals and all that. He's understudied to Kenny Anderson, and then he picked up where the things came over. Left-handed quarterback, was very good with his kids and a few charities and all that. Unfortunately, Boomer would end up throwing with the New York Jets, and that kind of ended his career. And then he became a respected broadcaster in the booth. So, yeah, Boomer did his job. Number 4 is Michael Vick. I would have definitely put him in number 3, but, his prison sentence was not really good. He was dynamic from the University of Virginia Tech, almost led them to a national title game, to the national title. But then he was picked first overall. The Falcons made a swift trade with the Chargers for the one of Tim Dwight. But San Diego picked LT with that pick. So, yeah, it was a gigantic move by LaDainian Tomlinson. So, anyway, yeah, Michael Vick was drafted first overall by the Falcons. He was known for his video game efforts, especially Madden 04, where his elusiveness basically was off the charts. But, yeah, he had a few great touchdown runs and all that, and passes. Well, one great run was in Green Bay against the Packers, handing the Packers their first home playoff loss ever. That was in 2004. Vick unfortunately would bankroll a dog fighting kennel, and he got in trouble for a couple of years. So yeah, he wanted forgiveness. The Eagles gave him a chance to be a quarterback. He was decent, but he just couldn't run away from his problems, pun intended. Number 3 is Joe Theismann, runs with Heisman. Remember when I talked about Doug Flutie saying he was not the only one on this list to play in the CFL? Well, Joe Theismann did. Bet you didn't know that. No, did you? Anyway, Joe Theismann came from Notre Dame. He was a good, respectable quarterback. The NFL didn't really give him much of a chance. Well, then he went to Toronto up north when the CFL was worth something in the 70s. Backstopped the Argos to a Grey Cup appearance against the Calgary Stampeders. Of course, Leon McQuay fumbled the ball. But Theismann was a good quarterback. Washington took notice, decided to take him and made him the backup quarterback and made him the punter. Theismann luckily got through as Sonny Jurgensen was on in years, and they just couldn't find a good Washington quarterback in the late 70s. So Theismann stepped in as pivot, helped them win Super Bowl 17, became an NFL MVP, and made people realize that they had a great quarterback all along. Unfortunately for him, he would be injured in 1985 by Lawrence Taylor's tackle. Of course, the tibia snapped, and LT was so shaken by that. All that. Anyway, number two is Ben Roethlisberger, one team quarterback, Pittsburgh quarterback that is, two-time Super Bowl winner, multiple Pro Bowls, and sometimes a massive headache. Miami of Ohio was where he played, and he had a famous comeback. I think it was against Bowling Green with a Hail Mary. But then Roethlisberger was drafted by the Steelers out of Miami of Ohio and was made to be the backup to, I would say Tommy Maddox, but that's probably wrong. But yeah, Maddox sucked, and then Roethlisberger came in, and he actually had a 14-1 regular season, a 14-1 campaign as a rookie. He ended up losing to the Patriots in the AFC title game. But Roethlisberger was here to stay. Good old number seven. Pittsburgh knew what they had. It. He won two Super Bowls in 06 and 09. Don't tell Seattle fans about 06 because they think it's controversial. And 09 was that great pass to Santonio Holmes who did the toe tap. Roethlisberger got in trouble for crashing his motorcycle and had some problems and all that off the field issues. But the Steelers stuck by him and he became a star quarterback for them. And, Pittsburgh had legendary effort. And finally, number one is I think you know who number one is. I don't need to really tell you, but I have to tell you technically. His name is John Elway. So John Elway came from the University of Stanford. He lost his last college game, which was the play game against California in the big game when Cal did the laterals and the Stanford band was on the field and they lost a trip to the Hall of Fame Bowl. But anyhow, Stanford was happy John Elway would be drafted first overall by the Baltimore Colts in 1983. But you may be thinking, he never played for the Baltimore Colts. No, he didn't. John Elway made it perfectly clear he didn't want Baltimore to draft him. But Baltimore drafted him anyway because they knew they didn't want another team to have him. But a few weeks later, they traded him to Denver for Chris Hinton, Mark Herman, and some other stuff. It didn't work out for Baltimore because then the next year, Baltimore left for Indianapolis. There were many reasons why John Elway didn't want to play for Baltimore. Yeah, the franchise was a mess with Irsay and all that. And John Elway had leverage playing minor league baseball with the Yankees organization. But one thing people always forget is that there's a reason why Elway didn't want to play in Baltimore. Because Baltimore was coached by the infamous former Arizona State coach by the name of Frank Kush. You know, his name was on the field for ASU for a while. Frank Kush was kicked out of Arizona State for his bouldering tactics and his drills and all that were going a little too far. So basically, ASU had to cut him loose. And Frank Kush, after 1 year coaching in the CFL with Hamilton, found his way to Baltimore to try to fix the Baltimore Colts organization. And since Frank Kush coached in Arizona State and John Elway, alongside his father Jack Elway, were in Stanford, that was going to be a Pac-10 trouble. And they didn't want Kush involved. Anyway, so he went to Denver, which needed a quarterback after Craig Morton retired, who recently passed away, by the way. And then, John Elway took the reins. It took a while. Denver got to the Super Bowl 3 times in the 1980s. I know technically you're saying you're wrong because the third Super Bowl loss was in 1990, not 1989. But technically, it was the 89 Broncos. So he took the 86 Broncos, 87 Broncos, and 89 Broncos to the Super Bowl. All 3 times they got butt whipped by Phil Sims's passing accuracy, by Doug Williams' 5 touchdowns in 1 quarter, and also by Joe frickin' Montana. It felt like Elway was going to be the greatest quarterback to never win a Super Bowl. In 96, they had a golden chance, but fell to Jacksonville in the divisional round. And then, of course, the Broncos went on to change their colors to orange and blue. And what can 2 titles do for you? John Elway ended up winning back-to-back titles to end his career. He had retired on top, just like Peyton Manning, and it worked out. It made Dan Marino the best quarterback to never win a Super Bowl, so Jim Kelly, but that's the truth. But yeah, so John Elway is numero uno. Anyway, I'm just diving into.